Black Waitress found a beaten, paralyzed man on the road. Shocked to learn he was the billionaire CEO. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold, rainy evening in New Orleans when Naomi Carter was finishing her shift at the Bayou Spoon, a small but popular restaurant known for its rich Creole flavors and quiet ambience. The rain had been coming down in torrents for hours, creating a heavy mist that blanketed the streets in a damp haze. Naomi, tired from a long day of serving food and drinks, was eager to head home and escape the chill. As she walked down the sidewalk, her mind was already on the warm bed waiting for her. But then, something caught her attention. A figure lying motionless in the middle of the street, partially hidden by the dim streetlights and the rain. It was a man, or at least it appeared to be, sprawled across the wet pavement. At first, Naomi thought it might be someone who had been in an accident or perhaps a drunk person who had stumbled and fallen. But as she got closer, she realized it was much worse. The man was unconscious, drenched, and battered, with visible bruises and cuts all over his face and arms. His body was stiff, and his limbs were twisted in unnatural positions. He was not just hurt, he was beaten. Naomi's heart skipped a beat as she knelt beside him, her hands shaking slightly from both the cold and the shock of the scene. She could feel his shallow breaths against her hand, but that was all. She couldn't tell if he was still conscious or not. Naomi had always been a survivor, someone who had faced challenges head-on. But this was different. She had never encountered a situation like this before, and her first instinct was to help. The streets were eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of thunder echoing through the city. There were no cars passing, no other pedestrians. Just Naomi and this stranger in the rain. Despite the fear creeping up her spine, Naomi knew she had to act. She pulled out her phone, trying to dial for help, but the signal was gone, jammed, most likely, due to the storm. Her thoughts raced. She had two choices: leave him here and hope for help to arrive, or take him inside and try to save him herself. She couldn't leave him. Naomi gently turned him over, her hands working quickly as she tried to assess his injuries. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, but she pushed it aside. She needed to focus. With great effort, she managed to drag the man off the road and into the Bayou Spoon, the warmth of the restaurant providing a stark contrast to the cold, wet night outside. As she laid him down on the floor, she noticed something strange. He wasn't carrying any identification, no wallet, no phone. But there was a metallic card tucked into his sock. Naomi pulled it out carefully and saw a logo that looked familiar, but it didn't make sense. She'd seen this symbol before in the media, at corporate events, and in business magazines. It was the emblem of Monroe Tech, one of the largest tech companies in the country. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was looking at a billionaire CEO, someone whose name had been in the news countless times. But why was he here, beaten and paralyzed, in her restaurant, of all places? Naomi stared at him, unsure of what to do next. She had never been this close to someone with so much power, yet she couldn't even recognize him when he was just a man, broken and vulnerable on her floor. She stood there, wondering how she had ended up in this moment, her hands still trembling as she looked at the card in her hand. Her life, just like his, had taken an unexpected turn that night. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Naomi stood there for a moment, still gripping the metallic card in her hand. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in on her as she processed the situation. She had just helped a man, a stranger, who could very well be the CEO of a tech giant, someone who could easily change her life with a single call. The weight of that thought made her feel both uneasy and incredulous. The man, who had looked so helpless moments ago, was now slowly stirring on the floor. Naomi rushed to his side, her heart pounding in her chest as she checked his pulse. It was steady, thank goodness. She wiped the wet hair from his forehead, and with a deep breath, she did her best to reassure him. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince more, him or herself. The restaurant had emptied out quickly after the storm rolled in, and with no one else around, Naomi was left with this broken, bleeding man. His eyes fluttered open just a crack, and for a brief moment, Naomi saw the sharp glint of recognition in them. "Who are you?" he muttered weakly, his voice rough like gravel. Naomi wasn't sure how to answer him. She had no idea who he was, at least not yet. She had only seen the logo on the card tucked into his sock. Monroe Tech. It had been everywhere, on the news, in tech circles, and now, apparently, right in her restaurant. Naomi swallowed her confusion, trying to keep her composure. "You're safe now," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You were hurt. I found you on the road." She paused, feeling the weight of the situation settle over her. "You're going to be okay." The man looked at her with bleary eyes, his gaze darting around the dimly lit room. "Monroe? Tech," he whispered. "Please." His voice trailed off, and Naomi could see the exhaustion in his face. She had no idea what he meant, but she couldn't ignore the desperation in his eyes. She pulled up a chair beside him, keeping her hands steady. "I don't know who you are, but you need to rest. I'm going to get you help. Just hang in there." Naomi moved quickly, pulling out her phone to dial emergency services, but again, there was no signal. Her frustration grew. How could she help him if she couldn't even reach anyone? Naomi felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had a choice to make. She could leave him here, waiting for help. That might never arrive. Or she could take matters into her own hands. But even if she did manage to get him to a hospital, what then? Would anyone believe her story? A woman like her, working in a small restaurant, with a life defined by hustle and survival. Was she even the kind of person who could help someone like him? She hesitated for only a moment before her resolve hardened. She had helped him when no one else could. And no matter who he was, or how important he might be, Naomi wasn't going to let him down. She moved to the back of the restaurant, grabbing a first aid kit and returning to his side. As she cleaned his wounds and tried to stop the bleeding, she found herself thinking about her own life. How often had she been overlooked, dismissed, and ignored simply because of who she was? How many times had she been told she wasn't good enough, not important enough? She wasn't going to let that happen again. Not now. Not when someone's life was on the line. The man, still barely conscious, mumbled something she couldn't quite hear. Naomi leaned in closer, trying to catch his words. "Please," he whispered again, his eyes searching hers. "I know who you are. You saved me." Naomi stared at him in confusion. "You don't even know my name," she said, shaking her head. "I don't even know who you are." His lips curled into a weak smile. "You'll know soon enough," he said. Naomi didn't understand what he meant, but the intensity in his gaze made her wonder if there was more to this than she realized. The storm raged on outside, the rain still coming down in sheets, but in that moment, Naomi knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change, whether she was ready or not. Naomi continued to tend to the man's injuries, her movements steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She had helped him, and for some reason, she felt a strange sense of responsibility toward him now. He was in her care, and she wouldn't let him down. Not now. Not after everything she had been through in her own life. The storm outside raged on, but inside the Bayou Spoon, the warmth of the kitchen and the gentle flicker of the overhead lights provided a sharp contrast to the chaos on the streets. Naomi had grown up in New Orleans, a city where survival was about more than just getting by. It was about doing the right thing, even when no one was looking. The rain had brought with it a sense of isolation, as if the world outside had vanished, leaving Naomi and the stranger alone in this small corner of the city. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was a moment that would change her life, but she didn't know how yet. As the man slowly regained some strength, his eyes flickered open again. His gaze was no longer blank, but focused, though still clouded with confusion. Naomi held his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "How are you feeling?" she asked, gently brushing his wet hair back from his forehead. He blinked slowly, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't know, where am I?" he asked in a hoarse whisper. Naomi paused, trying to decide how much to reveal. She didn't want to overwhelm him, but at the same time, there was something about him, something she couldn't ignore. "You're in the Bayou Spoon," she said, her voice calm. "You were hurt, but I found you and brought you inside. You're safe now." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, then with something else, something Naomi couldn't quite place. "I know you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What do you mean? We've never met before." He winced as he shifted slightly, his body still weak from the injuries. "No. I mean, I know you. I saw you once in the city. You were waiting tables at that restaurant down the block. You looked different." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had worked in so many places over the years, but she had never imagined that someone would remember her. And for a billionaire CEO to remember her? That felt impossible. She had been invisible to the world, working long hours just to get by. She couldn't remember ever crossing paths with anyone like him. "You're mistaken," Naomi said, though doubt gnawed her. "I've worked a lot of places. You've probably seen someone else." The man looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of confusion and understanding. "No, I'm sure of it," he insisted. "You're the one who—" But his voice trailed off, his strength fading again. Naomi could see the exhaustion in his face and decided not to push him further. Instead, she focused on getting him comfortable. She grabbed a blanket from the back of the restaurant and draped it over him, hoping it would give him some warmth. She had no idea how long he'd been out there, but the storm had passed, and the night was growing colder. Naomi glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Her shift was long over, and she should have been heading home by now. But something about this moment held her in place. She couldn't leave him like this. As the man's breathing steadied, Naomi sat beside him, thinking back to her own life, her own struggles. She had fought so hard just to be seen, to be heard. But even now, when she was doing something good, something that could save a life, she felt that old feeling of being overlooked. He was a CEO, a billionaire, a man with power, wealth, and influence. And yet here he was, in her care, as vulnerable as anyone. Naomi couldn't help but wonder what he would do once he realized who she was. Would he remember her kindness, or would she just be another face in the crowd? She couldn't answer that yet. But as she sat by his side, she knew one thing. This wasn't just about helping someone in need. This was about something much bigger. She wasn't sure yet how or when it would happen, but Naomi knew that her life, and his, were about to change forever. As Naomi sat by the man, watching the rain finally stop and the city streets quiet down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. He was still out of it, but at least he wasn't in immediate danger anymore. The blood had stopped flowing, and his breathing had returned to a steady rhythm. Naomi stood up from the chair, stretching her aching back. She had been sitting in the same spot for hours now, and the weight of the situation had begun to wear on her. She had no idea what to do next. She could have called an ambulance, but she didn't trust anyone outside of this place to take care of him. She felt responsible. She also didn't know what to say when he woke up. If he ever woke up. The man had fallen into a deep, almost feverish sleep, and Naomi couldn't help but notice the tension in his face. The bruises, the cuts, the signs of someone who had been through something much more than just a random accident. This wasn't just some random guy she found in the street. He was someone important. She could feel it, deep down. Naomi's thoughts swirled back to the card she had found in his sock. Monroe Tech. The company was known in the media, in tech circles, for its cutting-edge innovation and billionaire CEO. But who was he really? Naomi didn't know, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to know. All she knew was that she had already crossed a line by helping him. She had done something that most people would have hesitated to do. She had saved him, and for that, she was now tangled up in something bigger than herself. When the man finally stirred, it was as if his body had decided it was time. He groaned, a low, pained sound that filled the empty restaurant. Naomi rushed to his side, her heart pounding. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he seemed confused, disoriented. But then, his eyes locked onto hers, and something shifted. Recognition. He knew her. "You saved me," he said, his voice raspy, as if the words were coming from somewhere deep inside him. Naomi swallowed, her breath catching in her throat. "I had to," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You were hurt." He blinked, trying to focus on her face, but his gaze kept flickering back to the card in her hand. "I should have known," he muttered. Naomi's brow furrowed in confusion. "Known what?" He took a deep breath, trying to sit up, but Naomi quickly stopped him. "Take it easy. You're not going anywhere just yet." The man looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" he asked quietly. Naomi shook her head, her stomach twisting. No, I don't. I'm Ethan Monroe, he said, the words heavy in the air. CEO of Monroe Tech. Naomi froze. The name hit her like a slap in the face. Monroe Tech. The man in front of her was that Ethan Monroe, the one she had heard about in the news, the one whose company was making billions, whose face was plastered on every tech magazine cover. The CEO who had everything. And now, here he was, injured, vulnerable, and lying in her restaurant, with no one else around to help him. Naomi didn't know what to say. This wasn't what she had expected. She had never imagined that the man she helped would turn out to be someone so important, someone who had so much power, wealth, and influence. Yet here they were, her, a waitress just trying to survive, and him, a billionaire who was now relying on her to get through the night. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Why are you here? Naomi asked, still trying to wrap her mind around everything. Ethan looked away for a moment, his face tightening with something like regret. I was on my way to meet someone, he said, his voice quieter now. I had information, something I needed to share, but I was attacked before I could get there. Naomi nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving him. You were attacked? She repeated. By who? Ethan seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if considering whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he spoke. It's complicated, he said, but I'm glad you were here. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Naomi's thoughts raced. She had always known that New Orleans was a city full of secrets and untold stories, but she never imagined that she would be caught in one like this. Here she was, in the middle of a mystery far beyond her usual world of orders and tips, and she had no idea what would happen next. One thing was clear, though. Ethan Monroe was no ordinary man, and whatever had happened to him that night was far from simple. Naomi didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life, and his, would never be the same again. Naomi stared at Ethan for a long moment, trying to process what he had just revealed. Ethan Monroe, the billionaire CEO of Monroe Tech, was lying in her restaurant, bruised, battered, and more vulnerable than anyone would have ever imagined him to be. Her mind raced, but the calm on his face made her feel like the world had shifted in some unexplainable way. This wasn't just about a man she found on the street anymore. This was something much bigger. Naomi leaned back in the chair, her thoughts swirling. She had saved him. Someone powerful, someone with enough money to change her life in an instant. She could almost hear the possibilities in her head, the money, the opportunities, the connections she could make. But that wasn't why she had helped him. No, she had acted on instinct. It was the same instinct that had kept her going through every difficult moment of her life. The same instinct that had helped her survive, day after day, despite everything the world threw at her. Ethan looked at her, as if waiting for her to say something. You're still here, he said quietly, his voice filled with both gratitude and something else, something Naomi couldn't quite place. She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving him. I said I would help you, she replied, her voice steady. You're safe now. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes flickering with something Naomi couldn't read. I don't know why you helped me, he said, but I'm grateful. You didn't have to. Most people would have just walked away. Naomi shook her head. I couldn't just leave you there. No one deserves that, no matter who they are. Ethan let out a soft laugh, but it was a bitter sound. You'd be surprised, he murmured. Naomi tilted her head, sensing there was more to his story. What happened? She asked, her voice gentle. Ethan hesitated, looking away for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust her with the truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with regret. There are people who want me dead, Naomi. I've made a lot of enemies, some of whom will stop at nothing to bring me down. I've been trying to expose a corporate conspiracy, but I got too close. And now, I'm being hunted. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. She had known something wasn't right, but hearing it from him made it all the more real. This wasn't just some random attack. There were forces at work here, and Ethan was caught right in the middle of it. So what happens now? Naomi asked, her heart racing. Ethan looked at her, his expression hardened by years of dealing with high-stakes power plays. I don't know yet, but I can't stay here. I'm being tracked, and I need to figure out my next move. Naomi's mind was spinning. She couldn't just let him leave. He was in no condition to go anywhere. You can't go anywhere right now, she said firmly. You're not well. You need to rest. And I'm not letting you leave until I'm sure you're safe. Ethan studied her, the corners of his mouth twitching into a faint smile. You're a strong woman, he said. I can see that. Naomi didn't respond, instead choosing to focus on getting him the help he needed. She had already taken care of the immediate injuries, but there was no way he could go anywhere in his state. She had to keep him safe, even if that meant keeping him here a little longer than either of them had planned. For now, her focus was on getting him back on his feet. She grabbed a few supplies from the back of the restaurant, then turned to Ethan with a determined look in her eyes. You're not alone in this, she said. You may think you're in this fight alone, but you're not. I'm here. Ethan looked at her, his face softened by her words. I don't know why, but I believe you, he said quietly. Naomi helped him sit up, offering him some water. It was clear that his body was still fragile, but at least he was awake now, aware of his surroundings. He wasn't out of danger, but Naomi felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. We'll figure this out, she said, her voice steady. But you're going to need to trust me. Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. I do trust you, he replied. Naomi took a deep breath. She had no idea where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Naomi sat across from Ethan, the silence in the room almost suffocating. The storm outside had finally calmed, but the tension between them remained thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Ethan had insisted he was ready to go, but Naomi wasn't buying it. He was still weak, and the wounds on his body were far from healed. She could see it in his eyes. He wanted to be in control, to take charge of his own fate, but Naomi knew that wasn't possible right now. She had made up her mind. Ethan wasn't going anywhere until she was sure he was safe. I can't stay here forever, Ethan said, his voice low, as though the words pained him. He had been pacing the small restaurant for the past hour, every few steps stopping to look out the window, his mind clearly elsewhere. Naomi glanced up from the first aid supplies she had laid out on the table. She hadn't been able to get a real answer from him yet about who had attacked him, but she could tell that whatever was going on, it wasn't over. You don't have to stay here forever, Naomi replied, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. But you're not leaving until you can stand on your own. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softening. I know you're trying to help, but I don't need to be coddled. I've been through worse than this, he said, though there was no conviction behind his words. Naomi stood up and crossed the room to where he stood. I'm not trying to coddle you, she said, her voice firm but kind. I'm just making sure you're not making things worse for yourself. She could see the frustration in his eyes, but she also saw something else, a recognition that he had nowhere else to turn. Look, I get it, she continued. You've got a lot on your plate. But I can't just let you go back out there without knowing what's going to happen next. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed to retreat into himself. Naomi could tell he was weighing his options, but she could also tell that he was starting to crack, just a little. His bravado was starting to give way to something deeper. I can't stay here, he said again, softer this time, more resigned. There's a lot at stake. People are looking for me. Naomi didn't hesitate. And I'm not going to let them find you, she said, her voice unwavering. She knew it was risky to involve herself this deeply, to get this entangled in his world, but she also knew that if she didn't act, the consequences could be much worse. Ethan looked at her, his gaze searching. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly, as if the question was the hardest one to ask. Naomi felt her heart rate quicken, but she didn't flinch. Because it's the right thing to do, she said, her voice steady. Because you can't fight this alone. The silence between them stretched on for a long moment. Naomi could feel the weight of his uncertainty, and she could see that the walls he had built up were starting to crumble. She wasn't going to let him push her away, not when she knew the stakes were this high. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know who to trust anymore, he admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I've spent my whole life making deals with people, with corporations, but now, I can't tell who's on my side. Naomi stepped closer, her gaze soft but resolute. I'm on your side, she said, her words cutting through the confusion and fear in the air. I don't have the answers, but I'll help you find them. You're not alone in this. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Naomi thought she saw a flicker of hope. He nodded, though it was barely perceptible. I don't know what's coming, but I'm starting to believe you, he said. Naomi nodded back, her resolve hardening. Good. Now, let's figure out what we're going to do next. She wasn't sure how they were going to get through this, but she was no stranger to tough situations. She had spent her whole life facing obstacles, and she wasn't about to back down now. The man in front of her was more than just a CEO. He was someone who had fallen, someone who needed help. And Naomi was going to make sure he got the help he needed, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. The next few hours would be crucial. The more she learned about Ethan, the more she realized just how high the stakes were. But for now, the only thing that mattered was getting him through the night. They would face whatever came next together. Whatever the future held, Naomi knew one thing for certain. She was in this fight now, and she wasn't going to back down. Naomi sat across from Ethan, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. The tension had built in the room, thick with uncertainty. Ethan had shared more about what had happened, but Naomi knew there was more, things he wasn't ready to reveal. Still, she couldn't let him go off on his own. She couldn't leave him to face whatever was out there alone. She had promised to help, and no matter what came next, she was going to see it through. She rose from the table, pacing the small space, her mind racing with possibilities. The city outside had quieted, but Naomi knew the danger was far from over. Ethan had told her that there were people looking for him. But who were they? Why had they attacked him? Naomi's thoughts were interrupted by Ethan's voice, low and strained. Naomi, he said, his gaze locking with hers, you have to understand. I can't stay here much longer. They'll come for me. They always do. Naomi turned to face him, her jaw set. And what do you think will happen if you leave? She asked. You're not ready to go anywhere. You're not healed yet. Ethan's face tightened, a mixture of frustration and guilt washing over him. I know, he muttered, looking down at the floor. But the longer I stay here, the more danger you're in too. I can't risk you getting caught in the middle of this. Naomi stepped closer, her resolve unwavering. I don't care about that, she said firmly. I'm already in the middle of it, whether I like it or not. You're not leaving here until you're well enough to make it out on your own. There was a long pause as Ethan considered her words. Naomi could see the internal battle playing out on his face. She understood. He had built his life on control, on power, on always being the one calling the shots. To have someone else take charge, even temporarily, was a blow to his pride. But Naomi wasn't backing down. She could feel it in her gut. This wasn't just about helping him anymore. This was about standing up for what was right, about offering a sense of safety, even if it was temporary. Naomi, I can't ask you to put yourself at risk for me, Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. Naomi shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. You don't have to ask. I'm doing this because it's the right thing. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, vulnerability. I don't know what's going to happen next, he admitted, his voice softer now. I don't even know if I'll make it out of this. Naomi placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and sure. You will, but you're not alone in this. Not anymore. Ethan let out a long breath, his eyes searching hers. For the first time, he seemed to let go of some of the walls he had built around himself. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with gratitude. Naomi nodded. We'll figure this out. One step at a time. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the sound of the rain against the windows. But it was there, distinct and urgent. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She motioned for Ethan to stay back, then quietly moved toward the door, her senses on high alert. She peered through the peephole, her breath catching in her throat when she saw who it was. A man in a black jacket, standing alone, his face partially obscured by a hood. Naomi's mind raced. Who was this? Did he know Ethan? Was he here to help? Or to hurt? She stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. The knock came again, louder this time. Ethan had noticed her hesitation and was already on his feet, moving toward the door. Who is it? Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes darted toward the door. I don't know, he said quietly. But whoever it is, we need to be careful. Naomi's mind spun with questions. Who could be looking for him this soon? Who could have tracked him down so fast? We can't take any chances, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. Ethan nodded, his face hardening. Agreed. But we're not going down without a fight. Naomi slowly opened the door, her hand steady on the handle. As the door creaked open, the man on the other side didn't seem surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost relieved. "I'm looking for Ethan Monroe," the man said, his voice low but urgent. Naomi's heart raced. The tension in the room was palpable. She glanced at Ethan, who had stepped forward now, his expression unreadable. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Who's asking?" The man's eyes flickered between the two of them, his gaze sharp. "I'm here to make sure you're safe," he said, his voice steady. "I've been following your trail since the attack. It's not over yet. There are people who won't stop until they get to you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" Naomi asked, her voice demanding now. The man looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm someone who's trying to help," he said. "But I can't do it alone." Naomi stood tall, feeling the weight of the decision in her hands. She could feel the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a choice about Ethan's safety anymore. It was about her own future, about the path she was choosing to walk. Ethan looked at Naomi, then back at the man. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice determined. The man nodded. "We need to get out of here. Now." The man at the door stepped inside without waiting for a reply, his eyes scanning the room quickly. Naomi's hand instinctively reached for the door, ready to close it behind him, but she hesitated. She didn't know him. Yet, there was something about his presence, something that felt urgent, calculated. Ethan seemed to recognize the unspoken question in her eyes. He stepped forward, his posture tense. "Do you trust him?" Naomi asked quietly, not taking her eyes off the man who had just entered. Ethan gave a quick nod, but Naomi could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't sure either, but it was clear they didn't have time to second-guess their decisions. "We have no choice," Ethan muttered, his voice tight. Naomi opened the door wider, letting the man in. He didn't look like a typical threat. There was no gun at his side, no aggressive posture. Instead, he seemed more like a man on a mission, with every movement calculated and precise. He was dressed simply, in dark jeans and a black jacket, his expression unreadable. "You need to get out of here," the man said, his voice low and urgent. "The people who are looking for you, they know you're still alive. It's only a matter of time before they track you down." Naomi exchanged a glance with Ethan. It was clear that they weren't dealing with just a random attack anymore. This was bigger. "Who are you?" Naomi demanded, her voice rising slightly with suspicion. The man looked at her, his gaze steady. "My name's Marcus," he replied. "I've been keeping an eye on the situation. You're in danger." Naomi stepped back, allowing him to enter fully. "And why should we trust you?" she asked, crossing her arms. "What's your stake in all this?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I work for a group who wants to stop the people after you," he said. "They've been watching the developments, but this situation is escalating faster than we expected." Ethan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed tightly. "What group?" he asked, his tone skeptical but curious. Marcus' gaze shifted to Ethan, his expression hardening. "That's not something I can explain right now," Marcus said, his voice clipped. "But you need to trust me. The longer you stay here, the more danger you're putting yourselves in. I can get you out, but only if you're willing to move fast." Naomi glanced at Ethan, who seemed to be weighing his options. He looked at Marcus, his eyes narrowing. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. Marcus didn't hesitate. "There's a safe house," he said. "It's secure. We need to move now." Naomi's heart raced. She had no idea who this man was, but she could feel the urgency in his voice, and it seemed like the only option. "Let's go," she said, turning to Ethan. "We don't have time to waste." Ethan looked at her, his face a mixture of reluctance and relief. He nodded. "Fine. Let's do this." They grabbed what they could, Ethan's jacket, Naomi's bag, and headed for the door. Marcus was already leading the way, his pace fast, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The rain had stopped, but the streets outside still held an eerie quiet. Naomi could hear the faint hum of distant car engines, but everything felt off, as if the city was holding its breath. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they crossed the street. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but whenever she turned her head, there was nothing but empty streets and dark alleys. They kept walking, deeper into the heart of the city. Naomi glanced at Ethan, who was walking just a few paces behind her. His face was set, determined, but Naomi could tell he was still rattled by everything that had happened. He wasn't used to feeling so powerless. The walk felt endless, each step adding to the weight of what was coming. Marcus led them to an old, nondescript building tucked away between two larger, newer structures. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong in the modern city. He stopped in front of a rusted door and knocked twice, swiftly and silently. There was a pause, then the sound of locks being undone from the inside. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. "This way," Marcus said, stepping inside. Naomi hesitated for only a second before following. The door closed behind them with a soft thud. The interior of the building was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering bulbs overhead. The air was musty, as though the building hadn't been used in years. Marcus led them down a narrow corridor, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floors. Naomi's heart was pounding. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She had no idea what was really going on, but she knew they were running out of time. The safe house, Marcus had said. But what was really waiting for them inside? As they reached the end of the hallway, Marcus stopped in front of a heavy door and turned to face them. "This is it," he said. "Stay close, and don't make a sound." Naomi nodded, and with one final glance at Ethan, she followed Marcus into the room. The door closed behind them with a quiet click, sealing them in. Naomi had no idea what would come next. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were in the right place. For better or worse, this was their next step. And there was no turning back now. The room was dark, save for the faint light that seeped through the small cracks in the windows. Naomi's heart raced as she stood beside Ethan, both of them now inside the safe house, the weight of everything that had transpired settling heavily in the air. The door had closed behind them with a soft click, locking them in with Marcus, who had taken a few steps ahead, his back turned to them. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line, that there was no going back now. They were in it, deep. Marcus turned, his expression hard, but his eyes flickering with something softer, something that Naomi couldn't quite place. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low, almost reassuring. For now, at least. Ethan, who had been silent ever since they arrived, finally spoke, his voice strained. "What now? What happens next?" Marcus looked at him, sizing him up. "We wait," he said. "We figure out what your next move is. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you off the radar. You can't be seen. Not yet." Naomi exchanged a glance with Ethan. They both knew that whatever was going on, it wasn't over. The stakes were too high. "I'm not going to hide forever," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I need to get back to work. I need to finish what I started." Marcus shook his head, his expression unwavering. "You're not going anywhere, Ethan. Not until we know who's behind this and what their next move is. You think you can take on everyone at once? You're not invincible." Naomi could see Ethan's jaw tighten, but he didn't argue. There was a long silence in the room, the only sound the faint hum of an old fan in the corner. Naomi felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had helped Ethan, brought him here, and now she was in this, whether she liked it or not. But as she looked at him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who had made mistakes, who had fought to get where he was. But now, he was as vulnerable as anyone. "What if they come for us?" Naomi finally asked, her voice quiet but filled with urgency. "What if they find us here?" Marcus's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer. "We've taken precautions. The building is secure. No one's getting in without us knowing." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "And after that," he asked, "what do we do when the storm finally hits?" Marcus looked at both of them, his gaze steady and serious. "We make our move. But right now, we need to stay put. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention. If we move too quickly, we risk everything." Naomi nodded slowly, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. She had never thought her life would take such a turn. One minute, she was just a waitress in a small restaurant, doing what she had to do to survive. The next, she was caught in the middle of a power struggle, helping a man who could destroy everything in his path. And yet, she couldn't back out now. She had already made her choice. Ethan was still staring at Marcus, his eyes filled with determination. "I don't like being a sitting duck," he said, his tone sharp. "I can't just sit here and wait for things to unfold." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Then you need to learn patience. You think you've fought battles before, but this is different. This isn't about making deals in a boardroom. This is real. If you want to survive, you have to let us handle it." Ethan clenched his fists, but Naomi could see that he was listening. The tension in the room was palpable, and for the first time, she could see the cracks in Ethan's facade. He was used to being in control, but here, in this moment, he was forced to rely on others. Marcus seemed to sense the change, his posture softening ever so slightly. "Look," he said, "I get it. You've worked your whole life to build something. But sometimes, you can't do it alone. You have to trust the people around you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and Naomi could feel the shift in him. Finally, he spoke. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll wait. But I'm not going to hide forever." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll figure this out. But right now, your safety comes first. No one can afford to make a move until we know who's pulling the strings." The tension didn't fully lift, but there was a sense of understanding between them. Marcus had made it clear that the most important thing was to stay hidden for now, and Naomi had agreed, even though it wasn't what she wanted. She glanced over at Ethan, who was still processing everything, but his expression had softened. He wasn't the untouchable billionaire anymore. He was just a man trying to survive, and Naomi could respect that. The next few days were going to be crucial. They didn't have much time, but Naomi was ready. She had taken the first step, and now, all they could do was wait. But Naomi knew one thing. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone.